In 408 AD, Rome was ransomed for 3,000 pounds of black pepper. Not gold, not silver. This dull powder in your kitchen once financed empires and quietly triggered the wars that built the modern world. For centuries, this wrinkled berry was worth its weight in gold, counted grain by grain on brass scales. Kings locked pepper in vaults beside sapphires and pearls. Cities on 3 continents rose and fell over its trade. And you, right now, keep it casually in a paper shaker beside the salt on your kitchen table. How did a dried berry from a monsoon forest outprice the metal that measured every treasury on Earth? To answer that, we must travel back to a coast most Europeans could not even name at the time. The plant is Piper nigrum, a woody climbing vine wrapping itself around taller trees along India's Malabar coast. It grows quietly, patiently, throwing long strings of tiny green berries under the shade of the rainforest canopy. Believe it or not, black pepper, white pepper and green pepper all come from this exact same plant. Only the timing of harvest and the method of drying separate them. Pick early, sun-dry with the skin on. You get wrinkled black corn. Ripen fully, soak, strip the skin, you get white. Brine unripe berries for green. Inside each berry hides a molecule called piperine. It is piperine that bites your tongue with heat. Piperine lifts the flavor of every dish it touches and was once believed to warm the very blood. Ancients used piperine to purge disease and even preserve the flesh of the dead in sacred burial rites. In small doses, a mild stimulant. In the language of the ancients, it was simply called black gold. But here's the thing. Pepper was never only flavor. It carried weight of meaning far beyond the kitchen. It was medicine. It was tribute. It was proof of wealth on any table where it appeared. To grind pepper before a guest was to say, without words, you had pulled treasure from a distant world. But who first dared to eat it? The story begins thousands of years ago in Neolithic Kerala. Monsoon rains soak the Western Ghats for months, and in that damp green world, the wild pepper vine flourishes. First gatherers did not plant it. They climbed the vines, cutting ripe strings and drying them on sunlit stones. By the time written records begin, Tamil traders already spoke of pepper as a staple of southern commerce. Small ships crossed the Arabian Sea to Yemen. Camel caravans carried sacks of blackberries north into Mesopotamia, from there onward to the Nile. And along the way, pepper became something far more than food. In Egypt, archaeologists opened the mummified body of Pharaoh Ramses the Second and found peppercorns pressed into his nostrils. Peppercorns, from a coast 3,000 miles away, pressed into the nose of a god king by silent embalmers. Little did they know the berries preserving a pharaoh would one day preserve entire economies of the ancient world. Pepper was placed in tombs, burned in temples, ground into healing ointments for wounds and battlefield injuries alike, chewed by physicians who believed it drove cold humors from the belly and restored fire to the blood. And this changed everything. Once a substance is deemed sacred, medicinal, and rare, its price stops obeying reason. By the 1st centuries BCE, spice caravans carved paths through desert and mountain, all pointing toward one green coast. Then Rome tasted it and lost its mind. The Romans did not invent pepper trade, they industrialized it. Around the middle of the 1st century, Greek and Roman sailors mastered the rhythm of the monsoon winds. Leave Berenice on the Red Sea in July, and the summer wind carried you straight across the open ocean, straight to the Malabar coast in 40 days. Return in winter, and the wind reversed, sweeping you home. Suddenly the middlemen were cut out. Fleets of Roman ships, over 100 at a time, sailed for India. They returned bulging with pepper, ivory, cotton, and pearls. But pepper was the anchor cargo paying for the voyage. The elder Pliny, great Roman naturalist, watched this trade with alarm, warning pepper was draining the empire's silver. He calculated the loss at 50 million sesterces yearly, a berry offering neither sweetness nor nourishment, yet still coveted. And yet Pliny too kept pepper on his table. In Rome, near the Forum, stood a vast warehouse complex, called the Horea Piperataria, the pepper warehouses. Built by Emperor Domitian, they stored every luxury spice from the east. Guards patrolled the aisles. Clerks weighed each sack. The rent alone from these warehouses fed the entire imperial treasury. For centuries, pepper flowed into Rome like a slow, dark river, seasoning the lavish feasts of powerful senators. It flavored a famous cookbook attributed to Apicius, whose recipes called for pepper in nearly every dish, even desserts. Then, in the year 408, the river froze, and everything Rome trusted began to collapse. The Visigothic king Alaric stood at Rome's gates with an army, demanding an enormous ransom to spare the city. The list survives: 5,000 pounds of gold, 30,000 pounds of silver, 4,000 silk tunics, 3,000 hides dyed scarlet, and 3,000 pounds of black pepper, listed like a precious metal itself. In late Roman law, pepper could pay your rent, settle a debt, fund a dowry, or satisfy tax collectors. Rome fell, but here's the thing: pepper's price only climbed higher as the Western Empire crumbled around it. For centuries after, pepper kept moving. Arab merchants dominated the middle stretches, sailing swift dhows across vast trade routes. Their dhows crossed between India, the Persian Gulf, and East Africa, threading spices through storms and monsoon winds. In medieval Europe, the shortage of Roman silver made pepper feel rarer, more precious than it had ever been. And here, another persistent myth takes deep root. One you've almost certainly heard whispered about medieval European kitchens. You may have been told medieval Europeans used pepper to mask the vile taste of rotten meat. It is a tidy story, believe it or not, and it is also, historically speaking, almost entirely wrong. The peasants who ate questionable meat simply could not afford pepper. This spice was worth its weight in gold. And the nobles who could afford pepper had absolutely no need to eat rot. They owned their own herds, their own smokehouses, their own salt cellars. The myth simply does not survive contact with historical reality. The real driver was something older: status. A lord's stable was measured in the perfume of its spices. Pepper meant rich. Pepper meant that this house touched the very furthest ends of the known earth. And beneath the status ran medicine. Medieval physicians followed the ancient Greek theory of the four humors. Pepper, hot and dry, was thought to balance the body's cold and damp constitutions with remarkable efficacy. It was prescribed for coughs, for melancholy, for weak digestion, and even during outbreaks of terrible plague. Guilds sprang up around pepper. In London, the Guild of Pepperers was founded during the 12th century. It became one of the wealthiest fraternities in the entire city, its powerful merchants trading exotic spice. They eventually evolved into the worshipful company of grocers, whose enormous Great Hall still stands proudly today. In Venice, entire noble families built their vast fortunes on nothing but the lucrative pepper contract alone. A single sack, hauled up from a galley in the lagoon, could buy a house on a canal. Rent was sometimes paid in pounds of pepper. Dowries between wealthy noble families were counted in pepper. A tenant who owed his landlord 1 peppercorn a year was effectively holding that land for nothing. That phrase, peppercorn rent, still survives inside English common law to this very day, centuries later. But one great monopoly stood between hungry Europe and the distant source of these precious dark berries. By the 14th and 15th centuries, the pepper road became a long chain of many trading hands. Indian growers sold to Arab traders. Arab traders then sold to Egyptian middlemen in Alexandria and Cairo. and the Mamluk sultans of Egypt firmly held the last critical gate along the entire pepper route. They taxed every single sack, sometimes doubling its final price with just one official Mamluk stamp. From Alexandria, the Venetians took over. Their galleys carried pepper to the busy stone docks of Rialto. From there, it fanned out across Europe by mule and river barge, enriching every merchant along. Venice and the Mamluks had, between them, a chokehold on the Western world's supply of black gold. Every kitchen in Paris, Bruges, Nuremberg and London paid a hidden tax, and every monarch dreamed of breaking it. The first crack came from the westernmost corner of the continent, Portugal, poor in soil, rich in sailors. Prince Henry the Navigator spent decades pushing tiny caravels down Africa's coast, mapping capes no European had rounded. In 1498, Vasco da Gama rounded the Cape of Good Hope and crossed the vast Indian Ocean. He dropped anchor off Calicut on the Malabar coast and when asked his purpose answered, "Christians and spices." They meant pepper. In a single voyage, the Venetian monopoly cracked. Da Gama's holds returned brimming with peppercorns. The profit paid for his fleet 60 times over, and the Portuguese moved fast to seize this new prize. Within 20 years, they built a chain of forts along the Indian coast, from Goa to Cochin. They called it the Estado da India, demanding every pepper ship buy a Portuguese license, the cartaz. Refuse and be sunk. Cannon fire replaced caravan bells. A spice trade was now defended by warships. But rivals soon arrived. In 1600, English merchants received the royal charter and founded the East India Company. 2 years later, the Dutch followed with the Verenigde Oost-Indische Compagnie, the VOC, another pepper empire born. Their charters, fleets, soldiers and debts were all built to carry peppercorns and spices to European harbors. These were not merely trading houses, they were armed states, empowered to wage war, mint coin, sign treaties. Then a single island turned the pepper trade to blood and revealed what the spice race had truly become. Deep in the eastern islands of what is now Indonesia, in the Banda archipelago, grew a different treasure, nutmeg. But the same men, the same fleets, the same balance sheets ran that trade as ran the pepper trade. In 1621, Dutch Governor-General Jan Pieterszoon Koen sailed to Banda with soldiers and Japanese mercenaries. He accused the islanders of trading with the English. His punishment was almost total. Villages were burned, elders were executed on the beach. Of a population of perhaps 15,000, only a few hundred survived. The empty islands were divided into plantations sold to Dutch settlers who worked them with enslaved labor. Pepper and its sister spices were now, quite literally, bought in corpses across the emptied Banda beaches. 2 years later, on Amboina, Dutch officials tortured and executed English merchants they accused of conspiracy. The event sparked decades of Anglo-Dutch war, fought as much in the Spice Islands as in the North Sea. On Sumatra, in the pepper-growing region of Lampung, local rulers rose repeatedly and violently against Dutch demands. Villages burned, fields were replanted at gunpoint, and still, for a while, the pepper flowed onward to Europe. But here's the thing about monopolies. They rarely survive their own greed for very long, no matter how ruthless. As Portuguese, Dutch and English fought each other, pepper vines were quietly smuggled to new soil abroad. To Ceylon, to Malaya, later to the Caribbean, to Africa, to Brazil. Pepper spread across warm continents. Once a plant that grew only on one coast, pepper became a crop that thrived anywhere warm and wet. And as supply expanded, the god price of the little berry began, at last, to quietly fall. By the 18th century, pepper stayed profitable, but no longer bought kingdoms. By the 19th, it was bulk commodity. By the 20th, it sat cheaply on every roadside diner counter in a shaker of glass and tin. The spice that built empires became almost free. The largest producer today is not India, it is Vietnam. The hills of Daklak and Jalai grow roughly 40% of the world's supply today. India, Brazil and Indonesia share most of the rest. Piperine, that ancient mystery molecule, now sits under modern microscopes. Researchers study its power to enhance absorption of other compounds, its anti-inflammatory effects, its interactions with the human liver. Somewhere in a laboratory right now, someone is measuring exactly why your tongue burns when pepper touches it. Meanwhile, on the original Malabar Hills, a quiet revival is underway among small fair trade cooperatives growing heritage pepper. They harvest heritage berries by hand on shaded plots and sell directly to specialty markets across the world. The finest single-estate peppercorns from Kerala now fetch prices that would make a medieval merchant nod in recognition. Every time you twist a pepper mill, you perform a small ritual older than any nation on earth. You are echoing Roman fleets and Arab dhows, Portuguese cartazes and Dutch cannon, Venetian bookkeepers and Banda widows. A ransom of 3,000 pounds paid to save an eternal city, all echoed through one small ritual today. One click, one puff of black dust on your plate, the empire of pepper lives on, invisible. One spice sold kingdoms, another poisoned them. Pepper was the first true global commodity, before sugar, tea or oil. Pepper first stitched Asia, Africa and Europe into one market, held together by ships, guns and relentless European greed. Everything after, sugar plantations in the Caribbean, tea gardens of Assam, oil fields of Arabia, followed the pepper blueprint. Find a resource growing in few places, control the seaways, fortify ports, crush local rulers, take profit home. But here's the thing, none of this was written into the berry. Piperine never demanded empires or ordered massacres. Value is a story we agree to believe. For centuries, people agreed this dried fruit was worth dying for. And when enough people agreed, whole civilizations bent themselves to fetch it. And this changed everything about global trade. The shaker on your table is a tiny monument to that agreement, a century of Roman silver flowing east. A monument to Alaric's ransom, Venice's counting houses, the Cape of Good Hope and the bloodied Banda Beach. To the Vietnamese farmer who packed the sack that filled that shaker on your kitchen table last winter. But the next spice we craved was far darker. It poisoned emperors and launched a secret Dutch war. Next week we uncovered the spice that drove men to trade an entire American island for a single grove. It is small, brown, probably in your kitchen right now. Subscribe for weekly videos about the history of food. Hit the bell so you don't miss it. If pepper